What does a forgotten glass of water cost? For Catherine Jensen, a 26-year-old waitress drowning in debt and despair, she feared it would cost her the job she desperately needed. She was overworked, overlooked, and on the verge of breaking. But sitting in her section was a quiet, unassuming man who saw more than just a simple mistake. He saw the truth of her character in a moment of overwhelming chaos. This isn't just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It's a story about the invisible tests we face every day and how a single act of grace under the most extreme pressure can change a life forever. What happened in that diner wasn't an accident. It was an interview for a position she never knew existed. The 5:30 a.m. alarm didn't so much wake Catherine Jensen as it simply gave her permission to stop pretending to be asleep. The digital red numbers glowed in the pre-dawn gloom of her tiny North Hollywood apartment, a stark reminder that another day of the relentless grind had begun. For a fleeting second, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where the alarm was for a flight to Florence to study art, a dream so old it felt like it belonged to a different person. But reality came crashing in with the soft, wheezing cough from the other room. Daniel. She swung her legs out of bed, the worn floorboards cold against her feet. Her brother's room was small, dominated by the hospital-grade bed the insurance company had grudgingly agreed to cover 3 years ago. Daniel was 17, but his body was failing him with the speed of a man 4 times his age. He had a rare form of cardiomyopathy, a genetic betrayal that had stolen their mother a decade ago and was now coming for him. "Hey, sleepyhead," she whispered, pushing his damp, sandy hair off his forehead. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and a faint blue tinge colored his lips. He stirred his eyes, fluttering open. They were her eyes, the same deep cobalt blue, but his were clouded with a permanent exhaustion. "Kate!" he rasped, his voice a ghost of its former strength. "What time is it? Time for the champion to take his meds," she said, her voice a well-practiced performance of cheerful efficiency. She had the pills organized in a weekly container, a rainbow of life-sustaining chemicals. She held a glass of water to his lips, her hand steady, despite the tremor she felt in her soul. They had been a team of 2 for the last 5 years. Ever since their father, unable to cope with the grief and the mounting medical debt, had simply walked out and never returned. Kate, then 21, and a promising art student at UCLA, had dropped out without a second thought. Daniel was her world. His heartbeat was the rhythm of her life. After he'd taken his medication, she helped him get comfortable and checked the oxygen monitor clipped to his finger. The number 89 was lower than she liked. It was always a little lower in the mornings. She made a mental note to call the nurse later. Back in the kitchen, which was really just a corner of the living room, she stared at the pile of envelopes on the small table. They weren't letters. They were demands. Final notices. Each one was a paper cut to her spirit. The rent was a week late. The electricity bill had a threatening red stamp on it. And then there was the one from St. Jude's Medical Center. She opened it with trembling fingers, already knowing what it would say. It wasn't a bill, but a financial consultation summary. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she read the familiar, terrifying words. The experimental treatment they had discussed, the one Dr. Albright called Daniel's only real shot, was a new type of gene therapy. It wasn't just surgery. It was a biological reconstruction of his heart muscle. And it came with a price tag that felt like a cruel joke, $250,000. Insurance deemed it investigational and refused to cover it. Application for financial aid denied. The words blurred. $250,000. She might as well try to build a staircase to the moon. She made $15 an hour plus tips at the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant that sounded much fancier than it was. It was a decent place, a step up from a greasy spoon diner, popular with the business lunch crowd, and couples on dates who wanted to feel sophisticated without breaking the bank. On a good week, she could clear $1,000. At that rate, she'd be able to pay for Daniel's surgery in about 5 years. Dr. Albright had given him 6 months. A cold, hard knot of panic tightened in her chest. She sank into a chair, her head in her hands. She had sold her father's old car. She had sold her mother's jewelry piece by painful piece. She had no savings, no family to borrow from, nothing left to sell except her own dwindling hope. "I can't do this," she whispered to the empty room. "I can't." But then she heard Daniel cough again, a weak, fragile sound that cut through her despair like a knife. Yes, she could. She had to. She would pick up another shift. She would beg for more hours. She would scrub floors, wash dishes, do anything for Daniel. She splashed cold water on her face, pulled her long brown hair into a severe tight ponytail, and put on her uniform black pants, a starchy white shirt, and a black apron. She looked in the mirror. The girl staring back was a stranger, her face etched with a worry that didn't belong on a 26-year-old. The vibrant, paint-splattered artist was gone, replaced by a tired waitress. Before she left, she scribbled a note and left it on Daniel's nightstand. "Have a good day, Danny. Mrs. Gable will be here at 9. I'll be home late. Double shift. Love you more than all the stars." As she locked the apartment door behind her, the number echoed in her head. $250,000. It wasn't just a number. It was a wall. A monolithic, unscalable wall, standing between her brother and the rest of his life. And she had no idea how she was going to tear it down. The bus ride to Beverly Hills was a 45-minute journey through different worlds. She watched the gritty storefronts of her neighborhood give way to manicured lawns and towering palm trees. At the Gilded Spoon, the pressure was immediate. "Jensen, you're 10 minutes late," barked Mr. Henderson, the restaurant manager. He was a man whose slicked-back hair and pinched face seemed to be in a permanent state of disapproval. He thrived on wielding his minor authority like a weapon. "My apologies, Mr. Henderson. The bus, save it." He snapped his eyes, scanning her uniform. "Table 7 has been waiting for their check. The Davenports are coming in at noon. I want them in your section, and I don't want any complaints. They're friends of the owner. And for God's sake, try to smile. You look like you're heading to a funeral." "I might be," she thought, the words a bitter taste in her mouth. But she just nodded. "Yes, Mr. Henderson." The lunch rush was a blur of taking orders, carrying heavy trays, refilling drinks, and forcing a smile that felt like a cracking mask. The Davenports were exactly as demanding as Henderson had advertised, sending back a steak because it was a shade past medium rare, and complaining that the ice in their water was too cloudy. Kate absorbed their condescension with practiced neutrality, her mind a million miles away, endlessly crunching numbers that never added up. Every clink of a fork, every polite "thank you." Every dollar she tucked into her apron pocket felt futile. It was like trying to fill the ocean with a thimble. The wall of 250,000 loomed over her, casting a shadow on everything. The double shift stretched before her, an 8-hour expanse of aching feet and feigned politeness. She felt a desperate, clawing exhaustion that went deeper than muscle. It was in her bones, in her soul. She was running on fumes, and the tank was almost empty. The lull between the lunch and dinner rushes was a 2-hour tease of calm that only served to heighten the anxiety for the chaos to come. Catherine used the time to call the visiting nurse, her voice low and urgent in the staff break room, which was little more than a closet with a wobbly table. Mrs. Gable confirmed her fears. Daniel's oxygen saturation had dipped to 87 in the afternoon. She'd had to administer a dose from the emergency tank. "He's getting weaker, Catherine," the kindly nurse said, her voice laced with a professional sorrow that was somehow worse than pity. "We need to have a serious conversation about the timeline Dr. Albright gave you. The window for that therapy to be effective is closing." Catherine hung up the phone, her hand shaking so badly she could barely place the receiver back in its cradle. The wall wasn't just standing there anymore. It was closing in. As she stepped back onto the floor, Mr. Henderson cornered her by the kitchen doors. "Jensen, there was a complaint from the Davenports. They said you were distracted and sullen." I smoothed it over. "But I'm putting you on notice. One more complaint like that, and you'll be looking for a new job. Understand?" "I understand," she said, her voice hollow. She didn't have the energy to argue to explain that Mr. Davenport had been trying to get her phone number, and she'd been expertly deflecting his creepy advances. To Henderson, the customer was always right, especially a rich one. The dinner rush hit them like a tidal wave. A Saturday night, the restaurant was packed, a noisy, chaotic symphony of clattering plates, loud conversations, and the constant shouting of orders in the kitchen. Kate moved like a machine, her body on autopilot, while her mind raced in a panic loop. Daniel money time, Daniel money time. She was triple-sat 3 tables at once. A family with messy children, a young couple on a first date, and a man alone who took the small, undesirable booth in the far corner near the drafty service entrance. She barely registered him as she dropped off menus, her focus already on the family demanding extra crayons. When she finally circled back to the corner booth, the man was looking not at his menu, but at the restaurant itself. He was watching the controlled chaos with a look of quiet, thoughtful observation. He looked to be in his late 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes, crinkled at the corners. He was dressed in a way that defied categorization, not wealthy, not poor. He wore a simple dark sweater over a collared shirt and well-worn but clean jeans. He had an air of stillness about him that was jarring in the middle of the restaurant's frenzy. "My apologies for the wait, sir," Catherine said, her waitress smile firmly in place. "It's a bit hectic tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" "It's quite all right," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm in no hurry. I'll just have a glass of water to start, please, and I think I'm ready to order whenever you are." "Of course," she said quickly, taking his order, the grilled salmon, a simple house salad. It was an easy order, a blessing on a night like this. "I'll be right back with your water." But she wasn't. On her way to the drink station, a child from table 12 knocked a full tray of glasses out of another waiter's hands. The crash of shattering glass brought Henderson storming out of his office. "Jensen, get this cleaned up now. Don't just stand there gawking," he yelled, even though it wasn't her spill. She knelt carefully, picking up the large shards of glass, her movements swift and practiced. In the background, she could hear the couple on the first date arguing about who should pay. The family with the kids was getting louder. The kitchen was yelling that her order for table 9 was up and dying under the heat lamp. Her mind was a maelstrom. Glass on the floor. Order for 9. First date fight. Daniel's oxygen. 87. Too low. 250,000. How? How? The single simple request for a glass of water from the man in the corner was completely washed away in the flood of more urgent demands. She got the mess cleaned up, delivered the cooling food to table 9, played mediator for the arguing couple, and took a dessert order from the family. She moved through the restaurant like a ghost, a whirlwind of motion, her face a pale, strained mask. She brought the man in the corner, his salad, then his salmon. She refilled the water for the family and the bickering couple. She checked on every table, a frantic looping circuit of her section. But a strange sort of tunnel vision had set in. Her focus was on the loud, the demanding, the problematic. The quiet man in the corner who asked for nothing, who made no complaints, became part of the scenery. He ate his meal slowly, methodically, his gaze sweeping over the room. He watched her. He saw Henderson snap at her for being too slow with a credit card machine. He saw her force a smile for the demanding family, even as their child smeared ketchup on the seat. He saw the deep, bone-weary exhaustion in her eyes every time she thought no one was looking. And he saw the empty space on his table where a glass of water should have been. He never said a word. Finally, the rush began to ebb. The family left, leaving a disastrous mess in their wake. The couple paid separately and left without a tip. The restaurant slowly emptied, the noise level dropping from a roar to a murmur. It was in that sudden quiet that Catherine's eyes fell on the corner booth. The man was finished, his plate clean, his napkin folded neatly beside it. And then she saw it. The empty, pristine patch of table. No glass. No condensation ring. Nothing. He had never gotten his water. A hot flush of pure, unadulterated mortification washed over her. It was the most basic, fundamental part of her job. Water. The first thing you bring. The easiest thing to remember. And she had completely, utterly forgotten. In her mind, this wasn't a small mistake. It was a symbol of her failure. She couldn't even handle this. How could she possibly handle saving her brother's life? She was failing at everything. Tears pricked her eyes. She felt like a complete idiot. This man had been patient and quiet, the one customer who hadn't given her an ounce of trouble all night, and she had given him the worst service of all. He would probably complain to Henderson, and given the notice she was on, that would be it. She would be fired. Her heart pounding with dread, she grabbed a pitcher of water and a clean glass. Her hand trembling so much that water sloshed over the rim. She took a deep, steadying breath and walked towards his table, preparing her apology, bracing for his anger. This was it. The final straw. She approached the corner booth like a condemned prisoner, walking to the gallows. The man looked up from the book he had pulled from a coat pocket, his expression unreadable. "Sir." Catherine began, her voice cracking slightly. She placed the now full glass of water on the table, a gesture that felt both absurdly late and deeply inadequate. "I'm so sorry. I completely forgot to bring your water. There is absolutely no excuse for it. It was unprofessional and unacceptable, and I sincerely apologize. Your entire meal should be on the house. I'll speak to my manager right away." She was rambling, the words tumbling out in a rush of shame. The man didn't look annoyed. He didn't look angry. He looked at her, his gaze gentle, and a small, slow smile spread across his face. It was a kind smile, a knowing smile. It completely disarmed her. "It's quite all right, Catherine," he said, his voice the same calm, steady tone she remembered from hours earlier. "Please." He gestured to the empty seat opposite him. Sit for a moment, if you can spare it. Catherine blinked, confused. Sit with a customer. Henderson would have a seizure. Oh no, sir, I couldn't possibly. I'm still on the clock. Henderson can wait, the man said, the casual use of the manager's name startling her. Please, I insist. Hesitantly, she slid into the booth, perching on the edge of the seat, as if ready to bolt at a moment's notice. She felt exposed, vulnerable. She was waiting for the lecture, the condescending reprimand about customer service. Instead, the man leaned forward, slightly, his eyes holding hers. You just passed my test. Catherine stared at him, bewildered. I'm sorry, she stammered. What test I failed? I forgot your water. The water was never the point, he said softly. Catherine, my name is Mortimer Pierce. For the last 2 hours, I've had a front-row seat to the Catherine Jensen show. I saw you handle that obnoxious couple, the Davenports, with a level of grace they didn't deserve. I saw you clean up a mess that wasn't yours without a word of complaint. I saw you get berated by your manager over nothing, and you took it with quiet dignity. I saw you comfort a crying child at another table while your own orders were getting cold. He paused, letting his words sink in. I saw a young woman under an immense amount of pressure being pulled in a dozen different directions and treating everyone with a fundamental decency even when they were treating her poorly. You forgot my water because you are human and you were overloaded. I didn't get angry because I wasn't testing your memory. I was testing your character. And your character, Catherine, is extraordinary. Catherine felt the world tilt on its axis. The air in her lungs seemed to vanish. This quiet, unassuming man in a worn sweater was speaking with an authority that was completely at odds with his appearance. He wasn't a customer complaining. He was an observer delivering a verdict. I don't understand, she whispered, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Let me be clearer. Mortimer said, his smile fading into a more serious, compassionate expression. I've been looking for someone. Not an employee in the traditional sense. I'm looking for a person with a specific set of qualities. Resilience, empathy, integrity under fire. The kind of qualities you can't list on a resume. So I do this sometimes. I go to places where people are working hard under stressful conditions, and I just watch. It's an unconventional recruitment method. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple and elegant business card. He slid it across the table. Mortimer Pierce, Chairman. The Pierce Foundation. Catherine stared at the card. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but her brain felt like scrambled eggs. The Pierce Foundation. You're a foundation. Among other things, he said with a wry chuckle. My main business is in logistics, global shipping supply chain management. But the foundation is my heart. It was my late wife's passion. We fund medical research, community, outreach programs, educational grants. Suddenly, it all clicked into place with the force of a physical blow. Mortimer Pierce. Not just any businessman. He was the Mortimer Pierce. Founder of Pierce Logistics, one of the wealthiest, most private men in the country. A genuine billionaire. The kind of person you read about in Forbes, not the kind who eats salmon in a corner booth at the Gilded Spoon. Catherine's jaw went slack. She looked from the card to the man, seeing him for the first time. The simple sweater wasn't a sign of modesty. It was the confidence of a man who had absolutely nothing to prove. The stillness wasn't passivity. It was power. She couldn't even say the word. I'm just a man who appreciates kindness, he said, deflecting the unspoken title. But I'm also a man who can see when someone is carrying a weight far too heavy for their shoulders, All night I've seen the stress in your eyes. It's more than just a bad shift, isn't it? Tell me what's wrong, Catherine. Tell me about the ghost that's haunting you." The question was so direct, so gentle, so unexpected, that it shattered the dam she had built around her emotions. The practiced smile, the professional armor, the years of holding it all in it all crumbled. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. Then another. Before she knew it, she was crying silent, hiccuping sobs, shaking her entire body. It was the raw, ragged sound of a spirit that had been stretched to its absolute breaking point. And through it all, the billionaire Mortimer Pierce simply sat there. His presence, a beacon of calm patience. He pushed the box of napkins on the table a little closer to her and waited. He waited for the storm to pass, ready to hear the truth. The torrent of tears eventually subsided, leaving Catherine hollowed out and trembling in the vinyl booth. The cheap, rough napkins were shredded confetti in her lap. She felt a profound, mortifying shame for her loss of control. Yet beneath it was a strange sense of release, as if a pressure valve that had been sealed shut for years had finally been forced open. She risked a glance at the man opposite her, expecting to see impatience or pity. Instead, she found only a deep, unwavering stillness in his gaze, an unnerving calm that seemed to absorb her chaotic emotions without judgment. "You have nothing to be sorry for," Mortimer said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her swirling sea of despair. "You've been holding that in for a long time, haven't you?" She could only manage a shaky nod, wrapping her arms around her midsection as if to hold her splintering self together. "Catherine," he prompted again, his tone gentle but insistent, cutting through her haze of embarrassment. "Tell me, what is the ghost that's haunting you?" The question itself was a key turning a lock deep inside her. No one had ever asked her that. They asked how Daniel was doing, if she was getting enough sleep, if she needed anything small, practical questions that skirted the great, terrifying chasm at the center of her life. But this man, this stranger, had looked past the tired waitress and seen the haunted woman beneath. And in his quiet, patient eyes, she saw not a threat, but an unexpected, inexplicable sanctuary. So she told him. The words started as a trickle, fragmented and raw. "My brother, Daniel. He's 17. She spoke of his heart, describing the medical condition, not in clinical terms, but in the language of a sister who lived with its daily realities, the blue tinge on his lips in the morning, the way he would lose his breath walking from his bed to the bathroom, the constant humming fear of the oxygen monitor dipping too low. As she spoke, the trickle became a current, then a river, the story pouring out of her, now with an unstoppable momentum. She recounted the story of their family, her mother's slow decline from the same disease, a painful foreshadowing of her current nightmare. She spoke of her father not with anger, but with a hollowed-out sorrow, describing the day he packed a single bag and vanished from their lives, leaving a note on the kitchen table that said only, "I can't." "I was at UCLA," she said, her voice barely a whisper, the ghost of her own lost dream flitting through the room. "I was studying art history. I was going to go to Florence, but Daniel needed me, so I came home." She laid bare the last 5 years of her life, the relentless cycle of low-wage jobs, the constant juggle of nursing schedules and double shifts, the slow, painful selling off of their mother's modest possessions. She confessed the soul-crushing weight of the debt, a mountain that grew larger with every hospital visit, every new prescription. And then she came to the precipice, the reason for the fresh, raw terror in her eyes. "There's a new treatment," she said, her voice cracking. "Dr. Albright at St. Jude's. He calls it gene therapy. A way to rebuild the damaged cells. It's experimental, but he says it's Daniel's only real chance. Not just to live longer, but to live. To have a life." She took a ragged breath, steeling herself to say the number aloud, to give voice to the monster that lived in her head. "The cost is $250,000. She said it flatly, the number a dead weight falling into the space between them. "Insurance won't touch it. I applied for every grant, every form of financial aid I could find. The final denial letter came this morning." She looked him straight in the eye, wanting him to see the full, unvarnished depth of her failure. "He has maybe 6 months. I'm out of time, and I'm out of options. I don't know what to do." Having finally given voice to her deepest fear, she sagged against the back of the booth, utterly spent. She expected him to offer some useless platitude to say, "I'm so sorry," or "I'll pray for you." She expected the conversation to end in an awkward, pitying silence. What she did not expect was the profound, electrically charged stillness that consumed him. The change in Mortimer Pierce was subtle at first, then total. He didn't move a muscle, but his entire presence shifted. The kind, passive observer vanished, replaced by a man of immense, focused power. His gaze sharpened, no longer looking at her, but seemingly through her, connecting a set of facts only he could comprehend. A flicker of something disbelief, then astonishment, then a look of profound, staggering recognition passed across his features. His posture straightened, almost imperceptibly. "What was the doctor's name again?" he asked, his voice suddenly stripped of its gentle tone, replaced by a quiet, urgent intensity. "Albright?" Catherine repeated, confused by his reaction. "Dr. Evan Albright." "And the hospital?" Mortimer pressed his eyes, boring into hers. "You said St. Jude's Medical Center." "Yes, that's right." Mortimer leaned back, a slow, disbelieving breath escaping his lips. He looked up at the ceiling of the restaurant for a moment, as if consulting with an unseen presence, before his eyes found hers again. The intensity was now mixed with a sense of awe, as if he were witnessing the final impossible piece of a cosmic puzzle fall into place. "My late wife, Eleanor," he began, his voice now low and resonant with memory, "was a force of nature. She believed that wealth was a responsibility, not a privilege. Her great passion in the last years of her life was funding cutting-edge medical research for pediatric heart conditions." He leaned forward, the puzzle pieces now clicking into a clear, stunning picture. "The Pierce Foundation is the sole benefactor for the experimental pediatric cardiac wing at St. Jude's Medical Center. 5 years ago, Eleanor personally championed the funding for a new, ambitious research project into cardiac gene therapy. She chose the man to lead it herself, a brilliant, dedicated young doctor she believed would change the world." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle before he even spoke them. "We call it the Albright Cardiac Initiative. The gene therapy your brother needs, Catherine. My wife's foundation, our foundation, paid for every dollar of the research that created it." The world stopped. The background noise of the restaurant, the distant clatter of plates, the murmur of the last few patrons faded into a dull, featureless hum. Catherine stared at him, her mind refusing to process the information. It was too much, too impossible. The sheer astronomical improbability of it was so immense it felt like a hallucination, a cruel trick of her exhausted, desperate brain. The man sitting across from her, the quiet stranger whose water she had forgotten, was the one person on earth who held the key to her brother's life. Before she could even begin to form a thought, let alone a word, Mortimer had his phone in his hand. He bypassed the screen, hitting a single button. "Richard," he said into the phone. The voice was no longer that of a kind stranger. It was the voice of a chairman used to immediate, unquestioning action. "Get me Dr. Evan Albright at St. Jude's. Yes, I'm aware it's nearly 10 o'clock on a Saturday night. I don't care if he's at home at dinner or on a yacht in the Mediterranean. His personal number is in my private directory. Find him and patch him through to my line. I'll hold." It was at that precise moment that Mr. Henderson, his face a storm cloud of managerial fury, finally decided to intervene. He had been watching from his office, his anger mounting at the sight of his waitress lounging in a booth with a customer. A flagrant violation of every rule. He marched across the restaurant floor, his hard-soled shoes clicking an angry rhythm on the tile. "Jensen, what in God's name do you think you're doing? I'm writing you up for—" Mortimer didn't even turn his head. He simply lifted his free hand, palm out a gesture of such calm, absolute authority that Henderson stopped mid-sentence, stumbling to a halt as if he had walked into an invisible wall. The manager's face went from red to a blotchy, confused pink, his tirade dying in his throat. He stared dumbfounded at the unassuming man in the simple sweater who was now commanding the complete silent attention of the room. A moment later, Mortimer's expression warmed. "Ah, Evan," he said into the phone. "Mortimer Pierce. I apologize sincerely for the late hour. I'm well, thank you. Listen, I have a rather urgent and frankly wonderful situation here. I'm with the sister of one of your patients. A young man, 17 years old. Daniel Jensen." Catherine's breath hitched in her throat. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she felt it in her ears. "Yes, severe cardiomyopathy. That's the one," Mortimer continued, a new warmth in his voice. "He needs your gene therapy procedure. I understand an application for financial assistance was misplaced. Clerical error, let's call it. Well, I'm rectifying it now. I am personally authorizing his treatment. All costs are to be covered in full by the Foundation's discretionary fund. No limits." He listened for a moment. "I want you to schedule him for the procedure as soon as he is medically cleared. Give him the best room, the best post-operative care, everything. Bill it all directly to my office." "Excellent. Thank you, Evan. You continue to make Eleanor proud." He ended the call and placed the phone gently on the table. The silence that followed was profound. He turned his gaze back to Catherine. Her face was a mask of utter disbelief, tears streaming down her cheeks, but they were no longer tears of sorrow. They were tears of a shock, so complete a relief, so total it felt like a physical force. "It's done," Mortimer said softly. "Dr. Albright's team will contact you first thing in the morning to schedule Daniel's admission." A choked sob escaped her lips. The wall she had been clawing at for years, the monolithic, terrifying wall of $250,000, hadn't just been climbed. It had been vaporized by a 1-minute phone call. Only then did Mortimer Pierce finally turn his head and acknowledge the frozen, sputtering figure of Mr. Henderson. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by chips of glacial ice. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, but carrying through the silent restaurant. "For the past 3 hours I have witnessed you cultivate an environment of pure hostility and disrespect. I watched you ignore the advances Mr. Davenport was making on this young woman. I saw you blame her for a spill she didn't cause. I saw you berate her and threaten her job over trivial matters, all while she performed her duties with a level of dignity you clearly cannot comprehend. Your sycophantic fawning over patrons you perceive as wealthy, and your contemptuous treatment of your staff is, to put it mildly, pathetic. Henderson's face had drained of all color. He had finally horrifyingly connected the dots. The owner of the Gilded Spoon, Robert Finch, was a golfing buddy of Mortimer Pierce. Henderson's entire professional life was imploding in real time. Mr. Pierce, sir, I had no idea. My sincerest apologies. If I had known who you were, I would have ensured. That is precisely the problem. Mortimer cut him off, his voice like sharpened steel. A person's worth is not determined by their status. Their dignity is not dependent on the balance of their bank account. You see, I wasn't just here for a meal. I was conducting a test, and you failed Mr. Henderson spectacularly. He turned back to Catherine, his expression softening instantly. But this encounter was about more than just the surgery, he said, his voice regaining its gentle timbre. My wife always wanted to start a special program within the foundation, a rapid response fund for families who, through no fault of their own, fall through the cracks of the system, just like yours. We're calling it Eleanor's Haven. It needs a director, someone who understands the problem from the inside, someone with empathy, integrity, and grace under extreme pressure. He slid his business card, which still lay on the table, a little closer to her. The position comes with a salary that will ensure you and Daniel never have to worry about a medical bill or a late rent notice again. It comes with the best health benefits my company can provide. It's a chance to use your heart, Catherine. To be the person who answers the call for help instead of the one desperately making it. The position is yours, if you want it. He stood, then his tall frame unfolding from the booth. He reached into his wallet and pulled out not a 20 or a 50, but 3 crisp $100 bills, leaving them neatly on the table next to his clean plate. This should cover the meal and the tip you were cheated out of earlier tonight, he said. Call the number on that card on Monday morning. My assistant Richard will be expecting you. He gave her one last kind look. Get some rest, Catherine. Your new life starts now. And with that, Mortimer Pierce, the billionaire, who had ordered a simple glass of water, turned and walked out of the Gilded Spoon. He left behind a shattered manager, a few stunned onlookers, and a young woman sitting in the beautiful, silent, world-altering wreckage of a life that had been completely and irrevocably rewritten. The world did not simply change for Catherine Jensen. It fractured, and from the cracks poured a light so brilliant it was almost blinding. The night after Mortimer Pierce left the Gilded Spoon, she didn't sleep. She sat in the worn armchair in her living room, the single lamp casting a warm glow, and watched the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her brother's chest on the baby monitor. The quiet, wheezing sound that had been the soundtrack to her fear for years now seemed different, imbued with a fragile but discernible note of hope. She held Mortimer's business card in her hand, tracing the embossed letters of his name over and over, as if trying to convince herself it was real. The promised phone call did not keep her waiting. At precisely 8:01 a.m., her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Her heart leaped into her throat. With a trembling hand, she answered. Catherine Jensen. The voice was male, calm and professional, entirely devoid of the impatient edge she associated with calls about her brother's health. Yes, this is she. Good morning. My name is Richard Morrison. I'm Mr. Pierce's executive assistant. He asked me to reach out. Dr. Evan Albright from St. Jude's is expecting you and your brother Daniel for admission this afternoon. A room has been prepared. We've arranged for a medical transport service to pick you both up at 11 o'clock if that's agreeable." Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. "A medical transport," she whispered, thinking of the bumpy, stressful bus rides to the hospital. "Of course," Richard said, his tone gentle, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We want to ensure Daniel is as comfortable and stress-free as possible. Consider it all handled." The transport arrived on time, staffed by 2 kind paramedics who treated Daniel not like a fragile patient, but like a young man on his way to a victory. At St. Jude's, there was no waiting in a crowded intake area. They were met at the entrance by a patient advocate who led them straight up to the cardiac wing, the Eleanor Pierce cardiac wing, according to the polished brass plaque on the wall. The room Daniel was given was unlike anything Catherine had ever seen. It was vast and private, with a wall of windows that flooded the space with sunlight and overlooked a serene green garden. A comfortable sofa converted into a bed for her. There was no question of her not staying. It was assumed she would be by his side. Daniel, propped up against a mountain of plush pillows, looked around in awe. "Kate," he breathed, his voice thin but clear. "Is this real?" She walked to his bedside, taking his hand. It felt a little warmer than usual. "It's real, Danny," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It's all real." For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to hope without reservation, a shared, silent acknowledgement that they had, against all odds, been saved. The surgery was scheduled for the following Friday. The 8 hours Daniel was in the operating room were the longest of Catherine's life. She sat in the private waiting lounge reserved for families on the cardiac floor, a space designed for comfort that could do little to soothe the terror in her heart. Richard, Mr. Pierce's assistant, sat with her the entire time. He didn't pry or offer empty platitudes. He simply provided a quiet, grounding presence, keeping her coffee cup full and talking about neutral topics, books, the weather, the city. Whenever he sensed her anxiety spiraling, halfway through, Richard's phone buzzed. "It's Mr. Pierce for you," he said, handing her the phone. "Catherine." Mortimer's voice, clear as a bell, despite the faint static of a long-distance call, came through the line. "I'm in a board meeting in Singapore, but I wanted to see how you were holding up." The sheer magnitude of the gesture, a billionaire halfway across the world, pausing his business to check on her, was overwhelming. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice small. "That's understandable," he said warmly. "But you should know you have the best surgical team on the planet in there with him. Eleanor and I made sure of it. He's in good hands, Catherine. Stay strong." The call ended, but the warmth of his concern remained a small shield against her fear. Finally, after an eternity, the doors to the lounge slid open. Dr. Albright stood there, his surgical cap removed, revealing sweat-matted hair. He looked exhausted, but his eyes, when they met Catherine's, were shining. Her heart stopped. "It was a complex procedure," he began, and her stomach plummeted. He held up a hand quickly. "But it was a complete success. His new heart cells are integrating perfectly. The road to recovery will be long, but for the first time, Daniel has a real, tangible future." The world swam. The tension that had been a coiled snake in her gut for a decade finally uncoiled, leaving her utterly boneless. She sank into a chair, not fainting, but simply emptied of all strength. A sob, a sound of pure, undiluted relief, tore from her throat. Richard placed a steadying hand on her shoulder as Dr. Albright continued to explain the positive outcome, but Catherine barely heard the words. She only heard the echo of the most beautiful sentence she had ever heard. He has a real, tangible future. A week later, Catherine walked into the Gilded Spoon. It was strange to be there in street clothes during the lunch rush. The oppressive, anxious energy she associated with the place was gone. She saw her friend Maria by the drink station, who broke into a wide grin when she saw her. "I came to give my 2 weeks' notice," Catherine said, feeling a slight nervous tremor. Maria laughed. "Honey, you're the only one who doesn't know. Henderson was fired the Monday after you met your billionaire. The owner, Mr. Finch, came in himself. Word is he got a call from a very important friend who was not pleased with the management. There's a new manager, Sarah. She's great. She actually helps out when we're in the weeds." Maria pulled her into a fierce hug. "I'm so happy for you, Kate. Nobody deserved a miracle more." Walking out of the restaurant for the last time, Catherine felt the final chains of her old life fall away. She wasn't running from it. She was simply finally moving on. Her first day at the Pierce Foundation was another step into a new dimension. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and quiet ambition. As she rode the silent, swift elevator to the 14th floor, she watched the city spread out beneath her, a tapestry of lives and stories. Her office was not just a room, it was a statement. The corner view was breathtaking, but it was the details on the large mahogany desk that made her stop. A welcome basket was filled with gourmet coffee and pastries, but next to it sat a beautiful leather-bound journal and a professional set of charcoal pencils beside a high-quality heavyweight sketch pad. Tucked into the journal was a note on thick, cream-colored cardstock. The handwriting was bold and elegant. "Don't ever let this part of you go again. The world needs artists too. N.P." Catherine traced the initials with her fingertip. He had not just given her a job to solve her problems. He had seen the person she was forced to hide the artist she thought had died from neglect. In that moment, she felt a sense of being valued that was more profound and life-altering than any paycheck could ever be. She threw herself into her work as director of the Eleanor's Haven Fund. She remembered the humiliating, convoluted forms she'd had to fill out for aid, the cold suspicion of the bureaucrats who held her fate in their hands. Her first act was to create a new process. It was a simple, one-page online form that asked 2 fundamental questions: what is your situation, and how can we help? She built a small team, training them to lead with compassion, to listen, to understand that desperation doesn't always look dignified. Her first approval was a $1,500 grant to pay for car repairs and 2 months of auto insurance for a single mother undergoing chemotherapy. A story that felt painfully familiar. She spoke to the woman on the phone, her voice gentle. "We're handling it," she said, and felt the woman's shaky relief through the receiver. She was now the person who answered the desperate call. The weight she had carried for so long had been transformed into a lever, and she was using it to move the world for others, one family at a time. 3 months flew by. Daniel was home, his recovery slow but steady. The color had returned to his cheeks, and his laughter, once a rare and precious sound, now filled their small apartment, which no longer felt like a siege of debt, but a cozy, happy home. He was acing his online physics classes and already drafting his application essays for Caltech and MIT. One crisp autumn afternoon, there was a soft knock on her office door. Mortimer Pierce stood there, dressed in a tailored suit, but with the same kind eyes she remembered from the corner booth. "Richard tells me you're a natural at this," he said, his gaze sweeping over her office, landing on a framed photo of a smiling Daniel and one of her own charcoal sketches of the city skyline hanging on the wall. "I had a good teacher in what not to do," Catherine replied, a genuine smile coming easily to her lips. She stood, her hands clasped in front of her. "Mortimer, I feel like I've said it 1,000 times, but it never feels like enough. Thank you." "You're the one who earned it, Catherine," he said, his expression serious, as he stepped further into the room. "You passed the test long before you ever met me. You passed it every morning you got up to care for your brother when you were exhausted. You passed it with every condescending customer you smiled at. You showed more character in one shift than most people show in a lifetime. I just opened a door. You were the one strong enough to walk through it." He paused, his eyes lingering on her sketch. "Eleanor would have loved you," he said quietly, a familiar mix of grief and warmth in his voice. "She always believed that the best way to measure wealth was not in dollars, but in the amount of good you can do with them. She created the idea for this fund, you know. Eleanor's Haven. But she never got to see it launch. You're not just running a program, Catherine. You're fulfilling her legacy." The compliment was so profound, so personal, it settled deep in her soul. They stood in a comfortable silence, no longer a billionaire and a waitress, but two people bound by a shared belief in human decency. After he left, Catherine stood by her window for a long time, looking out at the sprawling city. She saw the endless river of headlights, each one a person with a story, a struggle, a hidden weight. She no longer felt like she was drowning in that vast, indifferent ocean. She was a lighthouse, and for the first time in her life, she felt steady, anchored, and shining a different kind of light into the world. Catherine's story is a powerful reminder that our true character isn't defined by our successes, but by how we behave when we think no one is watching. It was in her moment of deepest stress and a simple human error, a forgotten glass of water, that her true strength shone brightest. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a story of resilience, meeting opportunity of integrity, being rewarded in the most unexpected way. In our own lives, we are all both Catherine and Mortimer. We face our own dinner rushes, struggling to keep it all together. And we have the chance to be the person who sees beyond the surface, who offers patience instead of judgment. You never know when a small act of grace can unlock a world of potential for someone else. Be the person who sees the exhaustion behind the mistake. You just might change a life. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of kindness, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that prove hope is always on the menu. Thank you for listening.